This is Python's Paradise. This is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena, straight out of Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. And folks, here we are on October the 20th, 2022, and we are celebrating the 35th anniversary of Return to Horror High. And Tommy Kovac, host of Splat from the Past, has connected me with its director, Mr. Bill Froehlich. How do you do, Bill?
Pretty good, Brad. Really glad to be with you here. I had a great time chatting with Tommy about this film and about other aspects of my career, but very pleased to be with you here today. This will be fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I gave the film a fresh watch last night, and I gotta say it was like two films going at once watching that movie, and sometimes, it got a little confusing about what was reality and what
Well, and that level of confusion that you experienced,
yeah.
part part of the roller coaster ride of this film was intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I clearly in the writing of the script and clearly in the vision for directing it, I wanted people to at times experience that sense of, are we in the movie about the people that occurred in the past, or are we in the present, or is this reality? Is it film? That was part of what I wanted to have some fun with, and also wanted to have fun with that in the horror genre. And clearly, this is was intended to be a kind of comedic look at the horror genre, having fun
Mm-hmm.
with it, and also having fun with the nature of film. And as you just said, whether it's reality or film within a film, or in other words, which level of experience am I experiencing now? So the confusion you were talking about was actually intended in a hopefully a humorous, but also a way of trying to keep the viewer, the audience hooked. For the most part, I personally felt that it worked. So did a lot of critics who wrote in. Obviously, other people are uh, didn't react the same way. Some didn't like it, but that's horse races.
Yeah, yeah. Well, before we get into that more in detail, I'd like to get some of your background and what led you to get into the business.
Um, well, some of I actually I was very fortunate in kind of feeling in my gut and in my heart what I wanted to do when I was rather young. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up primarily in Pittsburgh, a few years in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and a little place in New Jersey called Medford Lakes,
Yep.
um, and uh, uh, and then kind of back to Pittsburgh, where I was during what would be middle school and high school. And my parents still lived there when I went to college in upstate New York, in Ithaca, New York, for actually um, uh, film and television and radio as my major. But when I was about a sophomore in high school, I just always loved television. I always loved films, and it suddenly occurred to me, wow, I wonder if I could actually do this for a career. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if if this would if I could make that happen. Of course, when you grow up in Pittsburgh, Hollywood is like a foreign planet. I mean, California is far enough away where the film industry was centered and located at that time. But the sense of Hollywood was really, oh my God. I mean, my friends thought I was nuts when they found out that that's what I wanted to do for a living. They said, "Oh, you're never going to make it. That's crazy. You want to go out there with all those strange people and you don't know anybody out there. What's wrong with you?" In fact, even in college, most of my classmates successfully, happily, went into radio and television broadcasting and theater in New York. I was one of the few of my graduating class who wanted to go directly to California and try to break into motion pictures and television. So that's kind of what started me off. And I literally I turned down, interestingly, some offers after graduation from college to be a
Mm-hmm.
radio disc jockey, a professional radio disc jockey. Ithaca College at that time, where I went, my alma mater,
Uh-huh.
um, uh, we ran a professional radio and television studio. And people came out of there and went right into broadcast television at various levels and right into radio. Some of the top disc jockeys in our country came from Ithaca College. Interesting side note, um, um, a guy who I was knew in college and was somewhat friends with because we all worked at the radio station.
Uh-huh.
He was a year ahead of me, and his name was Bob Iger. And
Okay, know that
Bob
name.
well, Bob he started working at one point very early on at ABC at lower levels, worked his way all the way up to the very top at ABC. And then, for 15 years, he was the very successful chairman, CEO of the Walt Disney Company, making, great strides there. So he did rather well for himself. And but at that time, when I graduated, because I had been a disc jockey during school, there were some radio stations, some really good radio stations that had heard my show, and I got some rather lucrative offers. But I would have had to sign like a 5-year contract with most of them. I knew I was only going to be that young, that naive, and maybe that stupid one time in my life to turn it down and really follow my dream to see if I could make it in film and television as a writer, director, and producer. Um, I had one really great boost, which has been an inspiration throughout my entire career in college. Um, the great Rod Serling, the creator of The Twilight Zone, and
Mm-hmm.
writer of feature films such as 7 Days in May, based on the book, the film starring Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, and he also wrote the screenplay co-wrote the screenplay for Planet of the Apes. But clearly a lot of major live television productions. I mean, the man won 7 Emmys, Peabodys. Rod Serling was extraordinary. Well, he was a professional in residence at Ithaca College when he came back to his family home in Ithaca when he was taking a break from Hollywood. And he taught seminars at my college. And I ran down to sign up for every seminar and had the good fortune to not only learn from him that way, but he kind of took me under his wing. We became friends. And I consider him my first mentor. And he's the one who really told me after writing short stories for his seminar and scenes, that would be from a film or something or a script for his seminar, and he would look at these and give ideas or, thoughts, feedback. At graduation, he knew that I seemed to want to do something different than like go into just radio or TV broadcasting. He learned I was going out to Hollywood. And he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, I really want to direct motion pictures. And he said, "Well, you can write your way into directing." And I said, "Yeah, but Rod, I'm not really a writer. I mean, I love telling stories. I consider myself a storyteller." And Rod said, "No, you're a writer." I said, "No, I mean, you're a writer, Rod." This one of the most celebrated writers in the history of the medium. Um, and and he said, "You forget, I've been reading your scenes and short stories for 4 years now, and I'm telling you, you're a writer." Well, that just floored me. That I was awed by that because I had such deep respect for this man, and I was in awe of his amazing talent. For him to even suggest that I had what it took to be a writer, it really lifted me up, and it gave me insight of saying, okay, maybe I need to pay attention to this, because he made a point of saying you can write your way into directing. And when we get to discussion on Return to Horror High, that's exactly what happened. So
Mm-hmm.
that advice from Rod Serling, in a way, was the seed that became Return to Horror High, because that was my directing debut in Hollywood, so to speak.
And what encouragement.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't you find that in our lives there are people who come into our experience who see something in us that maybe we don't even see at the time. And the encouragement we get from that person, whoever they are, they could be a friend, they could be a mentor, they could, uh, anybody, but it's something that clicks with you, and it opens up a part of you that you may not have recognized was fully there. That's why I think all of us are so connected in so many ways, and we don't realize it. We have much more similarities as human beings than we have as differences. Um, and it's a fascinating thing to me about storytelling, and because you get to kind of delve into that and try to figure it all out.
For me, it's Lisa Langlois, a Canadian actress who I've had on the show a couple of times, and in 2017, she invited me to assist her at a horror film convention in Toronto.
Oh, cool.
And I had never traveled before. I'd never been outside New Brunswick here before. And I'm 50 now. So when she said that to me, it was because I would always get homesick just going to Moncton or St. John, our closest cities. But when somebody like that invites you, you don't say no, you know?
I'm glad you didn't. Yeah, you opened
Uh,
yourself up to obviously what seems like a great experience.
yeah, and she's become a wonderful friend. In fact, I just assisted her for the second time at Horrorama in Toronto, and I'm going to travel down there again for another convention. And she won't be part of this one, but I'm going to see her while I'm down there, you know? So um, she's become a very good friend to the point, you know, where I mean, she sent my cat a Christmas stocking last year. But for Christmas time, but it's I asked her, I remember one time I asked her, I said, "Why me?" And she said she just saw something in me, you know, and she said it turned out to be correct, you know, and and so yeah, we all, hopefully everybody gets somebody in their life, but does that for them. And I
Yeah.
learned a lot through her about uh, strengthening my brand, as she would put it, you know. So,
Well,
but anyway, yeah, return to Horror High, you know. Can you believe it's been 35 years since that film came out? Like I said, I was born in 1972, so I would have been 15 when that came out. I did not see it at 15.
it probably was not meant for you to be seen see it at
I
15.
saw stuff I wasn't supposed to see when I was younger than that, though. But I didn't see that one at 15. But I had an uncle that owned a video store, so I had cousins that baited me into watching stuff I wasn't supposed to be watching, and eventually it led to the stuff I'm watching now, you know?
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Well, I can certainly, what you were saying before about your connection with Lisa Langlois, I can understand your reluctance to leave New Brunswick. You live in one of the most beautiful areas of the world. A very good friend of mine that I worked on The Outer Limits with, writer-producer Chris Dickey. He was born in Halifax, grew up in Nova Scotia. He and his wife live in Toronto now. Um, but he sent me some. I have never actually been to New Brunswick or Halifax, but I have seen these gorgeous photographic books on the area where you live, and it's magnificent.
Hmm.
So I can see why you'd be interested in hanging around there. It's gorgeous.
I don't know. I love Toronto. Like
Well, Toronto's a cool city.
I would live in Toronto if I could.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that
it
there's
was
all
an
the
experience because when I got number one, it was my first time on a plane, and I was nervous about that until I get up in the air, and it was like, okay, this feels like a bus, you
yeah,
know?
all these little seats flying across the air.
Yeah, I actually kind of dug it. Once it happened, I kind of dug it. And then we have when I got off the plane and got like I landed in Toronto Island, not Pearson. And so when I got to the surface, number one, it was the first time I'd seen escalators since the mid 80s because we don't have them here anymore. So that was nice. And once I got to the surface and it's like I looked up at all these buildings, it's like, we got some big buildings here, but nothing like that. It was like, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
Well, and Toronto's a beautiful city.
I love
Well,
Toronto, and Lisa's taught me well on navigating the subways and the streetcars and all of that stuff. And so I'm pretty much like can go there and pretty much know where I'm going right now for the most part. So
oh, good,
not
good.
bad,
Well,
not bad.
it is strange, as you had asked me about, here 35 years after the release of Return to Horror High.
Mm-hmm.
It's strange to feel all that time having passed. And there have been a wide variety of reaction to it. Everything clearly, but it's kind of become a bit of a cult classic, which amuses me to no end. I'm glad that those people have enjoyed it, who have made it that. I really like hearing from and seeing fans of the film. Um, and obviously there are people on the other end of the spectrum who did not like it. That's the nature of any movie, any book, any artistic expression, a painting, a sculpture, what have you, piece of music. Um, it was very interesting at the time when the film came out. At that time, films in the horror genre were not being reviewed. The distribution companies would just kind of put them out in the theaters, and the audience would find them. Um, But for some reason that I still don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
Return to Horror High got a lot of reviews when we opened it up in the regions and areas that we did. And some of the reviewers, top critics actually, who decided to review this film. And I don't know whether it's because I already had a little bit of a presence as a writer producer in television at the time, but they decided to review the film, and we got quite a few good reviews, which just really astonished me because we didn't think anybody would bother to review it. But Hollywood Reporter, Variety, Washington Post, a number of major other newspapers, and um, we were thrilled with the reviews because they turned out to be pretty good. At first there was one review I remember that said this was something like this was slice and dice horror as if Fellini had directed it. And I thought, oh my God, did my mother write a review? So it was fun. It was also this was my rookie directing experience, so it was very interesting to experience everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
We can chat about all that. Glad to share my feelings in those areas.
Well, you said you grew up in Pittsburgh. Did you know Tom Savini?
Certainly know who he is. Have not met him, but yes, very familiar with. I mean, I'm familiar with his work, his talent. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
No,
And
I
George
just.
and George Romero with his work.
Oh,
Mhm.
yes, George Romero. I met his
Pittsburgh.
widow. I
Mm.
met his widow. For some weird reason, I think Savini, but I never think George, because George eventually moved to Canada.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was waiting for him to do Living Dead in New Brunswick. Didn't happen. But I met his widow at one of the Horrorama events I went to, and I heard so many wonderful things about George, and I had her on in tribute to him. So, but
Very, very good.
but speaking of which, at our little Cineplex here, I think the next movie I plan to see is called Ticket to Paradise, and there's an actor in that gee, what is his name? What is his name? Who would that be?
Yeah, something.
Julia Roberts is in it. Who is the
Right.
actor in that movie? George something.
Yeah, he's done a few. He's done a few other things. Let's see. That would be George Clooney, maybe.
George Clooney. That's it. You know what's funny? He plays the actor slash security guard in your movie, and Of course, he went on to do Return of the Killer Tomatoes after that, and now it's kind of like, it's like he's now into all these big projects. It's funny. I've heard all good things about George Clooney as a person. One of the stories um, I heard that he's wonderful when it comes to signing autographs.
Hmm.
you know. I also heard that if you have a picture of him you want him to sign, I heard that he'll actually make fun of himself in the picture. That's what I've been told. And it makes me like the guy even more, because I like it when people can maintain a sense of reality within this celluloid capsule that they can often find themselves in. And I've heard so many good things about George, and he ends up becoming the first one to go and return to Horror High. But
Well,
but
there was a part of me that wished that I could have had George as an actor to stay around for a lot longer. I will tell you my feelings about him, my experience with him. I think he was, I think he was 24 at the time that we were filming. I'm about 9 years older than George, um, and um, and this was my directorial debut. I had at this time um, in the entertainment industry, in the film world, I had been associate producer, kind of co-producer level of an independent feature film starring Katherine Hepburn. I had
nice.
I had spent, and I went into that film right out of the mailroom at Universal, which was the very first thing I got a job in when I came out from college, earning minimum wage at the time, which was, I don't know, like $3.75 an hour. Um, but after the Hepburn film, I spent 2.5 years at what was MTM Enterprises, Mary Tyler Moore.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I was hired as a position, an executive position called Director of Drama Development and Production, because MTM, which had done all these classic half-hour comedies, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the Bob Newhart Show, Rhoda, things like that, was expanding into drama. And they were doing the Lou Grant series based on the Lou Grant character from Mary Tyler Moore Show. And they ended up then, later doing shows such as The White Shadow, Hill Street Blues. So they were very classy operation. And I learned the television business really at the feet of the legendary president and Mary's husband, Grant Tinker. And that was a marvelous experience. And from then, um, uh, wrote and produced, co-produced a television movie with my then friend and partner Mark, who we did Return to Horror High together,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a television movie called If Things Were Different, starring Suzanne Plachette. We got very fortunate. We got great reviews there, and it became the highest rated television movie for the year for CBS. So that helped us then start writing more television movies. We eventually moved into television series, and we helped launch the Mike Hammer series as the head writers on that. It starred Stacy Keach, a great guy and a terrific actor. And then we had just, by the time Return to Horror High the possibility of it came about, we had just finished producing a year of and helping to turn Scarecrow and Mrs. King into a hit TV series. And that starred Kate Jackson and Bruce Boxleitner. And then we had this opportunity. We were in development at Warner Brothers. And while we were developing some TV shows for Warner Brothers, this Return to Horror High came about. I can talk about that later. But back to George. Greg Sims, my other partner on the film, terrific guy who's the executive producer, and Greg and his friend Dana Escalante share writing credit with myself and Mark. Um, and because Greg and Dana contributed some things to the script was something that I, because of directing, I poured more myself into that. And Mark made some additions and changes and all that. But we all felt it was kind of a fun group effort. And Greg was executive producer and helped to pull a lot of the elements of the film together. And he was responsible for bringing George into the production because Greg was also a talent manager, a very good one at that time, and still is. And he represented Nancy McKeon, who was one of the key stars of Facts of
Facts
Life.
of Life. Yeah.
And George was in the Facts of Life as a kind of, I think, semi-recurring co-star. Um, and so that's how we got George. He was available, and Greg knew him. And I always thought George was at that time, he was a young, up and coming, but good talent. And then I got to know him a little bit on the film. Um, we I will say of my experience with him, he was thoroughly professional.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of fun at the time that we were working with him, both in the moments and the day, before shooting and getting him into costume and everything, and then obviously during the shooting experience with him. Very professional, a lot of fun, great sense of humor. Most importantly, I found him to be a kind human being, and that's right at the top in my scale.
I've heard that about him.
Yeah, he and subsequently, I didn't really I was focused on directing the film, so I didn't get a chance to hang with George as, let's say, as a friend, but he was an actor that I worked with. Really enjoyed working with him in the short time that he was on Return to Horror High. Ran into him a couple other times after the film. He went through a little period at that young age where he was wondering whether he should continue in the business because he felt he wasn't getting roles that made, that had a lot of substance or sense to him. And obviously, Return to Horror High was not, it was not Shakespeare. It was not, Citizen Kane or To Kill a
Mm-hmm.
Mockingbird. It was a fun comedy, kind of a little bit of a spoof, but fun with horror movie genre, which is a cool genre. Um, and I said to him, "Oh, you got to keep hanging in there because you've got something, George. You're really good." And obviously, he had a lot of good friends who kept telling him the same thing. And we have come to see that
Yeah.
he's a man of now enormous talent. I'm a big fan of his acting, and he has really grown, doing some wonderful things as director, writer, producer, along with his partner Grant Heslov, and in Smokehouse Productions.
Mm-hmm.
I feel, if every interview I've seen, everything I've read, just like you, he has continued to be a seriously kind human being. And he and his dad risked their lives to go into the Sudan to help people there. He stands by his integrity. He puts it into practice. I have enormous respect for him. He's a very cool guy. He does have a great sense of humor, and from what I understand, and saw just a touch of this on the set of Return to Horror, he he does have a big itch to be a good prankster, and I think he's pulled
Oh,
off
does he?
some pretty cool pranks. In fact, I saw an interview with Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt was asked about the kind of like the price of fame and how do you handle that. And he said he always struggled with the nature of that. He said, but the person who's got it down, knows how to really handle it, is George. And I think we see that in the interviews and everything. He just seems to be having a blast with all that. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing Ticket to Paradise with he and Julia Roberts. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
You know
Um,
who he reminds me of? He reminds me a lot of Cary Grant.
yeah, there's a touch of that. Well, George is a very good looking guy, but he also
Well, it's
has
the
this
same kind of
great
sense
sense
of
of humor.
humor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I see a lot of that. If I watch To Catch a Thief or North by Northwest that Cary Grant did for Alfred Hitchcock, I'm reminded a little bit of George Clooney.
Well, George has also he's things that I have read, interviews and other things from other people. People have just been delighted working with him because
Yeah.
he does live with that great sense of humor and share it with others. And um, that's pretty cool. And I think he has attracted uh, the sense of others who were pranksters. I had the very good fortune to work with Paul Newman on a feature racing documentary, feature length,
Mm-hmm.
and spent 3 months with Paul across Canada and the U.S. at racetracks, and ended up becoming friends with him. And Paul and Robert Redford used to prank each other all the time, great big pranks. And I just saw before, about 2 days ago, before us doing your interview here with me,
Yeah.
a segment of George. Somebody had posted something. It was a clip of George was on the Stephen Colbert show, the late
Okay.
night, show, and George was talking about. He showed a picture of Paul Newman, and Stephen Colbert said, "Oh, a friend of yours?" He said, "Yeah, yeah." So he was telling the story about how George said he had directed a film that turned out to be just an absolute bomb, I guess, at the box office. And Paul Newman, that same weekend that George's film opened, was racing and crashed his car. And so Paul took a big photograph of the wreck of the car and superimposed it over the poster of George's movie and sent him that, so that he had George this then poster of his movie with a car wreck on it, because the film had bombed at the box office. But George had a great sense of humor about that. He loved he loved those things, because he takes his work seriously, but I don't think he takes himself that seriously, the sense of fame or anything else, which is a very healthy thing.
Good.
And
Yes, it is.
and I really admire the choices that he's made in risk taking of some of the types of projects that he's gotten himself involved in, of really taking a shot at some things that some worked, some didn't, some have worked wonderfully well. But that's what it's like to be an artist when um, you have the possibilities of going after things. And I think he's got a lot of artistic courage in that regard. And I remember many years ago, around near the end of the time of ER, I think after he did one of his first features, which I think was what, the Peacemaker or something with Nicole Kidman.
Yep.
Um, and he called his account. This is I read this, I think, in an article about him. He had called his accountant and he said, "Do I have enough screw you money? In other words, do I have enough money to basically tell the powers that be, whether they're studios or networks or this or that he doesn't have to take certain jobs that are offered in order to put bread on the table?" And his accountant came back and said, "Yeah, you're okay. You'll be set if you live, decently." From that moment on, George said he decided he was not going to do any project that he didn't believe in, that he didn't think had some level of merit. That's pretty cool. And he's had, obviously a grand career to this point. And, it sounds like you're as much a fan as I am. And
Oh yeah, George is pretty cool. Yeah.
so I do get asked a lot what it was like to work with him. And it was a very short period of time on the film, but it was a lot of fun. He was a cool guy.
Getting a little off of Return to Horror High, what was your memories of Katherine Hepburn?
Wow. Um, I carry a lot of those memories with me, because she was spectacular.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is, to this day, she is probably one of the most opinionated people I have ever met. And she did not hesitate in expressing her opinion. She was also very willing to listen to you, to find out what you might think about certain things. Um, she was, on some level, she was an absolute delight to work with, but you kind of had to bring your A game. She did not tolerate fools, because she took her acting job totally seriously. She poured herself into each role. She did 110% and wanted to give the best of herself to the film, or whatever the project was, stage, film, because she felt the audience deserved that. Um, I asked her one time when we were on location, because something I was only 24 when I made this, was involved in this film with her. And one of the things I was thinking about was my future, and I was wrestling with the idea of, my goodness, what's it going to be like trying to have, if I get married at some point and end up having kids while I'm trying to work in this crazy entertainment business, which seems to demand so much of your time. how am I going to handle that if that unfolds for me? So I asked her point blank. So she was 69 when I made that film. I'm 24. And I just asked her point blank, I said, why didn't you have kids? Why didn't you ever have kids? And she looked at me and said, well, I'll give you a very serious answer. She said, I wanted to be the very best actress in the world. And I knew what that was going to take. She said, if I was going to be a mother, I would want to be the very best mother in the world. And she said, in all seriousness, I didn't think I could do both. And then she kind of looked at me with a little sly grin and she said, and also, I think the first time the kids didn't do what I wanted them to do, I would have killed them. She said that with a joking sense of humor,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think she was very honest about she really didn't think that she could be the best mother and the best actress at the same time. And wow, she certainly scored big time in the best actress category, and she loved it. She loved doing that. And she was a real trooper. This was a low budget independent feature film. She just loved the role. It was a G-rated family picture. It's called Olly Olly Oxen. Most people have not seen it. But it was my baptism with fire in the entertainment business as far as being directly involved in films. And I mean, she did some of her own stunts. And one funny thing that happened one time, we were in Altadena, which is a community just that sits right on top of Pasadena
Hmm.
in Southern California. And we were shooting in the backyard of a house that was the house of that represented the house of one of the kids who was one of the main characters in the film. And she knew we were low budget, so she said, "Just set up my dressing table outside in the backyard. I do my own hair and makeup." She said, the one thing I insist on is nobody touch my stuff, nobody touch my makeup, my brushes, my combs, because she knew what she was doing, and she'd done this for a long time. So we said, okay. So one morning, I get there really really early to the set, and I'm like the only one there, and I go into the backyard and I look, and there's this beautiful young looking woman sitting at her vanity table with long, gorgeous hair using Katherine Hepburn's brushes and combs. And I thought two things. Oh my God, I have got to stop this woman from doing this. Miss Hepburn is going to be furious. But this woman looked so beautiful because I could only see her from the side that I thought, oh, I'm single. Maybe if I play my cards right, I might get a date. So I walked up and said, excuse me, you can't really be sitting there. And she turned around. It was Katherine Hepburn. At 69, she was gorgeous and just vibrantly sharp and alive. She was wrestling with a little bit of the Parkinson's, but she was amazing. Um, and she was a big trooper throughout the whole film, helped us in a lot of ways. So it was a really fun experience.
Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting story. And I bet she probably appreciated it too when you come over there, because if you didn't know it with her, she would know that you was actually committed to making sure
Yeah.
things were.
Well, I'll tell you how much she stayed in character too. I mean, so devoted to the role and everything else, and was also very aware of what it was without getting out of character. She was very aware of what was going on, around her. There's a sequence in the movie. It involves a hot air balloon, and the two kids and the sheepdog and Katherine Hepburn and the adventures that follow. And at one point, she's chasing after the boys because they're in the basket of the hot air balloon. The balloon has escaped. It has accidentally inflated, and they're being carried away. And Katherine Hepburn chases after them in this old Packard pickup truck. And there's one scene where the balloon starts coming down low, bounces across the ground, the basket does, and then it takes off again. So the way we did that is that I was one of my jobs on the film, because of my size, I'm 6'4", and I've got some, size to me, was to be on the balloon crew. And we had this big nylon cord hanging below the basket where one of the prop anchors was hanging. And we would literally pull the balloon basket down. The balloon pilot was lying on the floor of the basket. The two kids were in the basket. A girl in a sheepdog outfit was in the basket because we couldn't have the sheepdog jump out. And there was a mistake in the communication that when happened, and the balloon pilot thought that he heard the term for burn, meaning turn on the gas jets, instead of the cam. But what was actually happening, the assistant director was saying turn the cameras. So he hit the gas jets for several seconds, and I knew, oh my goodness, this balloon is going to start taking off. And I had my hand wrapped around the nylon cord, below. So all of a sudden, I'm jerked up into the air, and the balloon starts floating away, and I'm dangling below the balloon basket. The director yells, "Keep filming! Just cut Bill out of the frame." And Katherine Hepburn stayed in character, going, "Boys, boys, come back, come back." And later she came up to me when the balloon finally came back down and said, "You did very well, Bill. You hung on." So, so it was an amazing experience on my first film experience to work with a legendary actress like Katherine Hepburn.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Return to Horror High had a lot of interesting people in it, and some standouts. And I'm going to tell you one person that really stood out to me in this, and I don't know how much of this was improvised, but every time she's on screen, she's wonderful. Is Maureen McCormick, I mean, she plays a seems like kind of a rookie cop, and she's on there surveying the scene for the captain, and she's always eating something, or just seems to me like she's a mess every time, and she's drinking something and making the slurpy sounds. I was delighted every time she's on screen.
Well, Maureen was a delight to work with. We have remained friends to this day. We lived in the same area for quite a long time, and she and her husband are great people. Um, One of the things I discussed with Maureen about her character, because I thought it would be, and I think this is one of the reasons why Maureen took the role. I thought it would be great fun to have her play against type of the character of Marcia Brady on the Brady Bunch. And
Hmm.
Maureen is a very good actress. She has much more range and depth uh, than what she projected as Marcia Brady. When she did a great job as that, and that character was Marcia Brady, and she played that character to perfection and got huge fans because of it. I wanted this role was written completely different from Marcia Brady, but Maureen took to the idea of having fun with that like a fish to water. And all the things you're talking about the food and the slump, she got into that so much that we had to keep the crew from cracking up when she was doing that. And when when she comes to she comes out at one point, and the police, she says, "Oh my God, what the hell happened?" Because she's got blood all over her uniform. And, she said, "There's blood everywhere, from Greenway's chemistry class to Brosnahan's English," which were two of my high school teachers. And she just, because I told her, I said, "Here's a cop who, cops can be pretty much straight laced at time and all that." And I said, "She's just like a little over sexualized, a little too sensual with her experience of what she gets into. And she doesn't have, she's trying to kind of be the cool cop, but her filter is a little loose, right?
I
And
loved it every time she's on screen. Like when the captain is like, talking about the bodies, and she's like, there's pieces here or pieces there or something like that. And just watching her try with a straight face to say these things, and it really sets a different tone for these
yeah,
scenes. And every time she's on screen, I laugh. I loved
well,
her.
I'm glad you reacted that way, because one of the directions I gave to her is, I said, "Maureen, with this character," I said, "surprise me. Don't be afraid to make some choices that might be strangely different." And she brought it. She really brought it, which was cool. It was a lot of fun, because you really want your cast, you want your actors to feel free to play in the playground that you set up, which is the story in the movie.
Hmm.
And you want them to be free enough creatively to bring their A game so that they take what you've done with the script and what you present and what you see as your vision of what you want the film to be. And you want them to be able to add to it. You want them to take their talent and elevate it, because that's part of the wonderful collaborative nature of this film medium. You don't make a film all by yourself. You have tremendous people helping you. And uh, as a director, one of your prime jobs, you don't so much, you don't give an actor a performance. You help guide them. And the most important thing you do as a director with an actor is hire the right actor. If you've hired the right actor, then you want to encourage them. You want to protect them. You can give some guidance, some direction of things, but you really want to just let them loose, because you know you've hired someone who knows how to embody this character. And
Yes.
Maureen was just that way.
You mentioned you're still friends with her. How's she doing now? How did you doing these days and coping with hopefully we're getting to the end of the pandemic. Knock on
Yeah,
wood.
that's been a challenge for everybody. Um, like a lot of people, as the years have gone on, she expanded into doing other things. She worked on trying to bring some projects together as a producer, and obviously continued acting. And um, you know the but overall, she's doing well. And the entertainment business, it's a lot of fun. It's exciting. It can also be very exasperating and frustrating, and it can be very, very challenging. It can be very different. It's not the easiest business to take on, because it doesn't operate like most businesses. It operates in its kind of its own world. And I have always felt, and I say this to college students who want to get into the business, don't get into this business unless there's something about it that you love. There's some element of it, whatever that may be: writing, directing, producing, being on production, being on doing visual effects, doing something, whatever it is, being on the executive side, being an agent, that some aspect of that you really love,
Mm-hmm.
because um, it's not easy,
No.
and it's crazy. it is it is crazy, um, and doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes. It's a wild ride.
How many times on set did she hear Marcia, Marcia, Marcia?
Yeah, I don't really remember that, but she always took that with good humor. And I think she's
I'm
continued to
glad.
do that because, the character of Marcia Brady and the fame of that has followed her throughout her whole career. At some point, I think she had to make peace with that, and I think she did. Clearly, I know she did. She has a great sense of humor
That's good. I
about
could
that.
see that in Return to Horror High.
Yeah. And the other thing that I enjoyed, Maureen is also a kind person. And that's very high on my list. And she's had her challenges, because um, being someone who has a level of fame as an actor in the entertainment business comes with its own challenges. Fans can be both delightful, and they can be a strange force or entity
Yeah.
to deal with. Because one of the odd things about fame is that people think, I know this person that I've seen on the screen. I feel I know them, especially someone who's been on television, who comes into our living rooms on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a little more than movie stars. You maybe feel a little more standoffish to a movie star because you don't see them as much. Um, and That can be a strange thing, to be out somewhere and have people always coming up and asking for autographs and photos and wanting to sit down and join you for a meal. And, uh,
Well,
you
she
know,
had lots of meals on Return to Horror High, I can tell you that.
yeah,
Standing there eating a hot dog while there's these bodies.
yeah.
I just get a kick out of her, you know,
Well,
like like.
our food budget was high on that because of Maureen.
Another performance that really stood out to me in this film too was because his name's escaping me, but I got your IMDb up here. So Vince Edwards played the biology teacher. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. He stood out to me a lot. And I gotta say, when I was done freshening up on the film, I watched it this morning because I work overnights at the hospital. So, um, because I'm a COVID cleaner there. But nonetheless, I actually went back and listened to the song that played during his dissection scene. And I loved the whole voiceover dialogue from the classroom played over the song. I thought was pretty cool, you know. But Vince Edwards was really good as this slimy biology teacher, you know, and for the little bit of time he's on screen, he really knocks it out of the park. Talk about him and how much of that did he improvise? Because he's really great in this.
Um, Vince was a real trooper with this. And here's an aspect of the entertainment business that sometimes a lot of people don't think about. Um, so here is this relatively low budget, independent uh, horror film with comedic twists. Um, I mean, our budget was like $865,000,
Hmm.
and um, Vince Edwards had been a movie star, and Vince Edwards had been a big television star. A lot of people, younger people wouldn't necessarily recognize him, but he was a star of a very successful television series called Ben Casey, MD, Dr.
Okay.
Ben Casey. But he also was a feature film movie star. So he had all this level of success. Um, at the time that he came to do Return to Horror High, he was doing other projects, but he didn't have the same star power, that he once had. That can be a challenge for a lot of people. But as a favor, he was asked to do this film. We knew what a good actor he was, and Greg Sims again helped to bring him aboard because we knew he could add good name value for us, but also good talent. And um, initially, he was a little reluctant about the role. He wasn't totally pouring himself into it, but I kind of took him aside and I said, look, let's you and I have some fun with this character and explore, what it can be. One of the things I liked about the sequence, besides the black humor in it, was, I've never really liked bullies, and a lot of people usually don't. And that whole sequence was about this teacher bullying and humiliating this student, and then the teacher gets this really ghastly comeuppance. Um, and uh, I talked to Vince about that and about having fun, with it. And he thought, oh, that's a good idea. And then I explained to him some of the shots that I wanted to do, and he thought that was very cool. And that's why when you see some of the shots, he leans down really close, into the playing with some of the microscope, looking at the body of the frogs they're dissecting.
Freddie.
Freddie. And he stuck pretty much to the script, but what he did ad lib was some pretty funny, pretty interesting gestures and some other ideas that he had in the very strange dissection sequence when he's the victim. And he was a real trooper in joining us in playing in that sandbox in that way, and he ended up having a lot of fun. It was funny, he was also in the midst of trying to set up some other deals for other projects. So he would do a take, um, and then when we would break to move the camera in another direction, he was always on the phone talking to his agent and then putting things together. But then when we were ready to shoot, he put that down, came right back into the set, um, and we had a good time. He ended up telling me, he said this was a much more pleasurable experience than I ever thought. I thought I was just doing this to put some, to help out a friend and Greg and to, get a few bucks to put in the bank account. He said, but this was fun.
Oh,
Um,
I'm glad.
and he gives, as you can see, he gives a very solid, very good, very nice performance. I mean,
Yep.
you believe, you want that, you really do want that biology teacher to get his comeuppance.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And of course, Lori Lethin was in Bloody Birthday, and here she is here, you know. She's somebody I haven't forgotten. And
Well,
yeah.
oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, no, what
What was
would you
that?
guys say?
Oh, I was just saying, Lori was really fine actress. She had also just recently, prior to our doing this film, had done some award-winning television movies. She was had starred in fabulous stuff, and she'd already built up quite a nice career and reputation. And we had fun doing this film, um, and it, she got to play uh, different characters, as you can tell from the film, because she's playing an actress playing a character in a film within a film. So at times you're wondering, okay, am I watching the actress or am I watching the character? Because that was part of, as you said, that's part of the fun of, is this reality? Is this illusion? Where are we? And at this expression. Um, and I will say that one of the inspirations, just a little bit of the inspiration for that aspect of the story of Return to Horror High that had come to me, there is a great film by director Richard Rush, screenplay,
Mm-hmm.
I think, by Lawrence Mark, I think. But uh, Richard Rush is a really good director, called The Stuntman, and it stars Peter O'Toole and Steve Railsback. And there are some elements, because it is a film about movie making, there are some elements where in that film he dips in and out of reality and illusion and film intentionally. I think it's a wonderful film. And I really enjoyed that. And I thought, wow, the horror genre is a way of dipping my toe into a similar experience and finding my take on that. And just to give you some insight into, like, how did Return to Horror High come about? Um, it actually started with Greg and his friend Dana Escalante had written a straight horror slasher movie. Um, and he sent it to myself and my partner at the time and said, hey, you guys want to make this movie with us? And we read the script. And the one thing that stood out to me was he had written a version of the scene with the biology teacher that Vince Edwards ended up playing. And I thought that was a really interesting sequence. And that then prompted me to, I got the whole idea for Return to Horror High then, of the film crew and everything else and all that. But I wanted to keep that sequence of the biology teacher. So I called Greg back and I said, look, we don't want to make this exact script that you guys sent over, but we love this sequence of the biology teacher. And then I told Greg my idea and I said, would you mind if I rewrote this whole thing? And Greg said, oh, yes, fabulous idea. Go ahead, do it. And so I then wrote most of the script. My partner, Mark, because he was off writing another script for us, for our partnership. And he contributed some things to this script, and I contributed some things to the other script that, he was doing. So in some ways, Mark and I at that time were kind of like uh, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, in the sense that they put both their names on a piece of music, even if one had written more of it than another. All the songs were always Lennon and McCartney, right? Um, and Mark obviously was the producer of Return to Horror High and did a marvelous job with that. So he and I really made the film together, along with Greg Sims and the help of the very talented people we made it with, including the phenomenal Roy Wagner, our director of photography. Check out his credits sometimes. He is one of the very best in the
Mm-hmm.
business. He is an artist. Um, so how it came about is so we had this script then, and I decided, hey, in all fairness, we'll just put everybody's name on the script. Mine, Mark's, Greg Sims, Dana Escalante. So it's Bill Froehlich, Mark Lasson, Greg Sims, Dana Escalante. Greg took the script to New World Pictures, which is the studio that ultimately made the film. They loved the script. They loved the script so much they didn't give us any notes. They brought us in and were talking about it. And this was going to be my directorial debut. So Roger Burlage, who was the CEO of New World Pictures, we go in to have this meeting, and Mark and I had already done television movies, and we had just finished doing Scarecrow and Mrs. King, so we had production experience and obviously writing experience. But I'd not directed anything in Hollywood before. I'd done some work in college along these lines, but that didn't count for people in Hollywood. And I remember Roger Burlage looking at me and said, "Hey, we really like this script. We're thinking we'd really like to do this movie." And they were operating from at that time there's a good
Skittles come by. He woke up to come over. Do you have a kitty?
I have my wife and I have 2 cats, 2 dogs, and 4 horses.
There you go.
So animals are beloved in our home.
Every time he comes by here, when I'm doing an interview, I stick him up here.
I'm glad you did. He's a great addition.
He's my buddy.
Well, that's the way my wife and I feel about our animals. They're our family. They're our buddies. I'm in my on the ranch. I'm in my office away from the house where I can. So at the moment there are no dogs or cats in here. Otherwise, I'd probably be picking them up just as you did. What I was saying about Roger Burlage, who was the CEO, and it was in that meeting, and they all said, we really love this script. We're really thinking of doing this. And he looked right at me and he said, "I know you've got production experience, things, but why should I let you direct this movie? You've not directed anything before." And I kind of knew this was coming, and I looked at him straight now and I said, "Well, knowing the script as I do, having been involved, clearly with the writing of it, I know this story better than anyone else. I know the vision that I have for it, which I had been explaining to them. I know how I wanted to do this. The kind of cast we're going after." And I said to him, "If we stay within budget at this level in the horror genre," I said, "Roger, I could probably deliver you 2 hours of fogged film and you'd still make your money back." Because the horror genre was very popular if you kept your budget low enough. And he looked at me and he kind of smiled and he said, "I like that kind of confidence. Okay, you can direct this." And they were really true to their word. Because we asked them, I said, "If we stay on budget, will you kind of let us make the movie we want to make?" And they really did. They were very pleased with the dailies. We did stay on budget. And they had the other thing that helped us is they had 2 other major movies going at the time. They were spending a lot of money on. One was called Death Before Dishonor. It starred Fred Dreyer, who did the Hunter series on NBC later, and Rutger Hauer, who was a big movie star, and he was doing a movie called Wanted Dead or Alive. The unfortunate thing that happened with us with Return to Horror High came about, and this is the nature of how crazy the entertainment business can be, because this can have nothing to do with the creative aspect of what you did with your film or TV show or whatever the project is. We finished the movie. I did my director's cut, and I showed it to the studio and to Roger Burlage, and he and the other executives, they loved it. They thought, "Oh, this is funny. This is great. This is exactly what we thought it was going to be. We know how to market this." Roger was very pleased. And they started putting together plans for what was going to be a really nice distribution campaign of putting it out as this comedic kind of look at horror films. In other words, an actual horror film, but that had a clear comedy sense to it, underlying and interwoven with the horror elements. Well, right before we were going to the movie was going to be released, Roger Burlage left New World Pictures to go on to, for him, greener pastures. And a new CEO came in by the name of Robert Remy, who had been successful as CEO in other areas. And he decided he wanted to change the things Roger Burlage had put in motion. And I ended up showing him the film with the executives, other executives that had loved the film. And he felt differently about it. He thought it should be put out as a straight slasher horror movie. Now, to their his executives, and this was a courageous thing for them to do, the executives that had been under Roger, they pushed back and said, "Oh no, we got to put this out with the comedy and everything else, and we've got all these theaters lined up." Well, Bob Remy pulled back on the number of theaters it was supposed to open up in, and didn't want to put as much promotion and marketing behind it because he wanted to put all the money into those two big films I told you about. So what happened to us is when the film came out and opened in the areas where it opened, we were selling out every screening in every city, in every area where the film opened. The lines were down the street for our film, which we were going, "Oh my God, this is incredible." But New World had planned to only keep the movie in the theaters for a couple of weeks, and then they were making room, for these other, projects. We had theater owners calling Greg Sims and begging him to get New World to keep our film in the theaters long because they were selling out every performance, which was kind of, unheard of because kids were coming to see it sometimes 2 or 3 times, and some adults clearly were seeing. And unfortunately for New World, Death Before Dishonor and Wanted Dead or Alive both tanked at the box office, and Return to Horror High, after its initial theatrical run, which it did very well in, but it wasn't as big as it should have been. It then went on to become their largest, one of their most successful video sellers. But we never got the full theatrical run that had been initially planned. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But it's been fun to see over the years that now it's got this kind of fun cult status to it, which I find quite amusing.
I wanted to mention too, Alex Rocco was so good at this as well as this gung ho person who wanted to speaking of putting ideas, he had certain vision and other people on the set had another vision, and he was like, "Yeah, but this is what kids want these days. They want more blood, and
Want more nudity, they want more blood, And that was one of the things that I wanted to poke fun at about the movie business and about the nature of some of this. And how I talked about how George Clooney, a very kind man, and very kind. Alex Rocco was one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. People who have worked with Alex through the years, he has sadly passed at this point, is one of the most delightful human beings you'd want to be around. And people who have worked with him in the past, they want to work with him on everything. I came away from Return to Horror High thinking, is there some way I can cast Alex Rocco in everything I ever do? Because he's that delightful to work with. He's that talented too. And so this, as you know, he's very funny in this film, but he's also very committed to the character of Harry Slierrick, this sleazy, low budget film producer, and he really kind of imbibes that, that nature. But take a look at The Godfather.
yeah.
Alex Rocco in The Godfather plays Mo Green, who is this sinister, Las Vegas end of the mob. Completely different character from this, and solidly dramatic, and in Alex is rock solid in that, and so many other things, And Alex Rocco is also in that movie I mentioned of The Stuntman, starring Peter O'Toole. He plays the sheriff, where the film company has come to shoot a location, and he's pissed off at at them. Alex, again, when you hire a good actor, the right actor, and you give them the space to just play and let go and try things and let them know, hey, give something a try. You know, because we had discussions about the character, and he knew what my vision was and what I wanted to do with this, but then he had ideas, and I told him, you know, as I tried to tell all the actors, try something. You know, if it doesn't work, we can do it again. Don't, you know, don't be afraid of mistakes. And I learned a good lesson on this film from an actor named Marvin McIntyre, who plays the makeup artist
Mm-hmm.
in the film. I saw that character in a totally different way than Marvin did, but I'd hired Marvin to play this role, and I almost made a rookie mistake as a director in wanting to completely change his interpretation of the character before I gave it a chance. Fortunately, Marvin really stood by his interpretation when we started the first scene with him, and it was totally different than what I wanted. And I and and he, even when I said, you know, try something, he tried something that was so different. I was kind of thrown at first. But Marvin said, hey, you know, you said, I've got a feel for this. Let me try. And I'm really glad that I listened to him, because I ended up really liking the performance that he brought to that character. It was totally different than what I had initially conceived. And, but because he committed to it in the way that he did and he believed in it, I felt his portrayal was completely believable. And that's one of the things I want from an actor, is I want a sense of truth so that whatever they're doing is completely believable.
Absolutely. And you know, I got some pictures up from IMDb, and one of them that's here. You got Joy Aston up over this guy's shoulder. She's completely nude. What was her reaction to doing this?
Well, you know, in low budget horror movies, um, there was always what clearly falls into the category of gratuitous nudity, right? And it is put in these horror shows many times, not just for the scare factor of putting, you know, female characters in jeopardy, but it's what studios would require because they thought it would help sell more tickets. It would get the horny teenage boys, you know, to want to go see the movies. And that kind of stuff does have its place to a certain extent, you know, in films. But I also was trying to poke fun at,
Hmm.
you know, at that. And the the interesting thing about, and I was just looking for some. I've got some of my Return to Horror High uh, stuff here, and I was looking for. Oh, this is the crew. Let's see. I was just looking for something that would, because you asked this question of what was her, you know, how did she look at that? So give me just a second, because I'm looking at
Yep.
something here to answer your question. Um, yeah, she was okay. Um, she had a good sense of humor about this, because the way she kind of took this attitude of, oh, okay, you know, they're doing another one of these shots and all this. So um, it came from this kind of sense, oh, this is what I've got to do for, you know, for this role. But I didn't want, and I thought she pulled this off nicely. I didn't want there to be any sense of, I wanted it to come across from her attitude that this was the thing you're doing for the job. In other words, there was no intended sensuality put into it. It was just like a matter of fact thing. Oh, I've got my top off at this point, or I don't have, you know, clothes. Because other than the way the scenes, there would, in many of these cases in horror films, there's no reason for girls to be topless or naked or whatever. Just as, it's kind of, why are they always taking showers when it's not necessary?
Mm-hmm.
For the story to take a shower. And in Return to Horror High, I make fun of also, or I point out the ludicrous nature of stuff when the character of Callie, played by Lori Lathine, they're about to go down those steps that opened up under the sandbox.
Yep.
And, and they didn't have a flashlight. And Lori said, why does everybody want to go into a dark place without a flashlight? But we see that all the time in horror movies. They go into the dark rooms. They can't see what they're doing. And obviously the filmmakers are trying to scare the hell out of the audience. So in all regards, including the use of the nudity, I wanted to kind of go behind the scenes to show a little bit about, what it's like. Just like when the exploding breast gets thrown across the set. And, the nature of filmmaking at its strangest. We wanted to have a good time. We wanted to have fun. We wanted it to be scary in the right places and to pull the audience into what's happening in this story, what's going on here, and hopefully trying to keep them on the edge of their seat, but also make them laugh and then scare them. One of the reasons I chose this to be my directorial debut, I'd been trying to get projects off the ground as a director prior to this, just couldn't do it because I didn't have enough of a level of experience or reputation yet for people to buy into that. So the horror genre was chosen in particular because, as I said, if you kept your budget low enough, studios, if they liked the vision you had and they liked the script of the project, they would let an inexperienced director, in my case, I'd not directed at all prior to this, in Hollywood, that is, they'd take a risk. And obviously it worked out. I was able to get that job under my belt. The job that opened up right after this was when we went back. My then partner, Mark, and I went back to producing television, and we went to being co-showrunners on the original MacGyver, the second season of that. But Return to Horror High, which was why I was pleased that you were intrigued enough and interested enough to want to chat about it, has always had a fond spot in my memory because I was young when I did this, and it was the first voyage into directing, and we did have a very good time.
Well, it looks like the cast is having fun. Andy Romano is another one that stood out.
Well, now here's an actor who's a very serious actor. He's done he had done a lot of work at that time. He had a really good career going, and usually a lot of dramatic roles and other things. But he loved the ridiculousness of the idea of his character, and there is a scene in the movie where he's sitting in an empty classroom, and Lori Lathine as Callie comes up to him, and Andy Romano, as for people listening, he plays the principal, who was of the high school when these things happened, and he's sitting in this empty classroom, kind of like spaced out or whatever, and he, in the script, he's reaching up and catching flies, right? And he loved the idea of that, but he said to me, why am I doing that? I love the weirdness of it. I said, why am I doing that? I told him, as we find out later, and this is a spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the film but might, so plug your ears. Later we find out that his daughter, the skeleton of his daughter still in a dress, is in the secret place that we end up discovering later, right? And her corpse has been there rotting for the longest time. So I said to him, you are obviously out of your mind, no people know, and you worship your dead daughter, and flies are desecrating her body. So you hate flies. You want to kill them all. And he went, oh, this is great. This is wonderful. Well, he ended up having such delight finding flies that he was wonderful that way. And he started bringing his own interpretation of some of this to the other scenes. And he was marvelous because he brought what I liked of what he did is he brought the sense of uh, unexpected danger and surprise. You never quite knew what he was going to do with the character. You never quite knew what that character was going to do. So you were always watching of what what's going on with this guy? What this is weird. What's going to happen here? And he, would do something to get you to. So another example of hiring the right actor who just loved the fun of taking on a completely different character than he'd ever played before.
And of course, we talked about Maureen McCormick, but it was like the foil and the straight man, her and Pepper Martin going back and forth. Of course, he was the police chief, on the scene, and those two had a fun dynamic together on this film as well. And he kind of, in a way, and not quite as extreme way, but kind of in a way reminded me of Sheriff Buford T. Justice and Smokey and Bandit.
Yeah, a little bit. Um, Pepper was very cool because again, he was always coming up with ideas of what he wanted to add to the character, and I love the fact that when an actor decides to take on a part, if they're serious about it, they look at it legitimately of, hey, I want this to be believable. I'm going to pour myself, into this. One of my fond memories of Pepper in this, besides, as you're saying, the wonderful interplay between he and Maureen McCormick, which is a delight. He came to me one time, and this happens right at the end of the film when, his character is coming out, Maureen McCormick's character is coming out, and they're both wondering, oh my God, what the hell has gone on here? This craziness. He came up to me and he said, I knew John Wayne. And he said, I'd like to do a little thing that's just a little tribute, to him. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, you remember the shot at the end of John Ford's great classic, The Searchers,
Mm-hmm.
where John Wayne is standing in that framed doorway. That's an iconic cinematic shot. And I don't know if you can see me here. He's standing there and he rubs his arm. He's holding his arm. He rubs. It's just a thing Wayne does there. But in that moment, it became part of this iconic historical film, classic moment. And Pepper said, I really want to come out and I want to walk out just like John Wayne and take that stance. He said, because the circumstances of what we've come through in this funny horror movie is, I just want to do this as a nod to my, friend John Wayne. And I said, yeah, great, give that a try. Well, what I felt, this is just me, maybe others picked up, what I felt is that interesting, strange gesture and him walking out slowly and the look on his face. And because he walks out almost with a hallowed, a look of he's been on hallowed ground. That's really strange that he doesn't quite understand. But the way he walked and the way he held his arm and rubbed it the way John Wayne did in The Searchers, it brought a whole different visual and energy dynamic to that moment. And I just thought, this is great. This is another example of an actor just elevating, what you had and the way, and I had set the shot to be a little more dynamic of how it presented them coming out. And what he did just, I think, really added to it. But, and he and Maureen sometimes would go off on the side and work out some strange little reactions that they would have to the, because some of the looks that Pepper gives Maureen's character when she's eating food, and it's, it's a lot of fun. When I when I've had the chance to take a look at the film again, I chuckle over those things because I remember, making those moments, and it was fun.
Yeah. I got two more cast members I want to ask about too.
Sure.
Remy O'Neill.
Well, that's okay. So here's a perfect example of what can happen in films.
Hmm.
Remy O'Neill is a terrific actress and just a lovely person. And she had a very nice career going at the time, some really good roles. And she really did this role as a favor. One of the mistakes that Mark and I made, as uh, this was our debut, as my debut as a director of a feature film, Mark's debut as a producer of a feature film. And one of the rookie mistakes we did make, New World gave us the go ahead so fast on this movie. We didn't have literally, they said, we want you in, literally in pre-production. We want you in pre-production this week. And we were like, what? We didn't really end up having the time to really go through the script the way we had wanted and address the combination of, I felt, and Mark had the same feeling, that we needed to cut something. We weren't quite sure what to cut because we felt we were going to be long. Well, we were right about that. But because things started rolling so quickly going forward with having to get into production, and I'm a first-time director, so I'm up to my ears in doing all the proper prep and everything else. And we discussed possible things to cut. We never finally pulled the trigger on those. So Remy ended up being in some sequences in which she was very good, all of which got cut. So the only thing that is left of her in the film is when she is lifted out of the van by Marvin McIntyre at the end. And I had to call her on the phone when we realized, oh my God, the things we need, because we ended up shooting several days of footage that, had we been smart enough to cut that stuff before we began shooting, we could have put that extra time to make some of the other scenes even better than they were. But I remember having to call Remy, who I really liked and who is a really good actress, calling her and tell her, the good news is you're still in the film. The bad news is we only see you come out of the van at the end, really. And that was a tough conversation to have because I really liked her and she was really good in the stuff that we had to cut out. So that's an example of sometimes an actor's best work ends up on the cutting room floor.
Is there any chance that there'll be an uncut of this movie, or is that stuff gone?
Well, it's not necessarily gone, but I don't think there will be another cut of this because a lot of that has to do with money, and there's not really the money to do that. There are some things I would have liked to have been able to put on the DVD as uncut scenes, but that some of that ends up you having to make decisions as to, and some of it involves money, and there are some decisions you make of saying, okay, this is the movie we made. This is the movie we put out for the audience to see. Maybe it should stay just that. And so that there are, with any project, there are, because of the nature of compromise, because of the nature of budgets, finances, shooting schedule time, all sorts of challenges that come with any film or television project. There are things that happen where, because of all those things, compromises, etc., you don't always get everything exactly the way you wanted it. There's a lot in this movie that was the way I wanted it. Some things weren't quite that way, and you learn to kind of roll with those punches and do the best of it. And that was one thing that was disappointing. I know more, those of us who are making the film know more about that than people who go see the movie, because unfortunately, she's just not in it. So they may see her name up there and go, wait a minute, that's all she did in this film? Well, no, she did a lot more. It just didn't make it into the final piece. There's another actress who was new to the whole environment. She was going to be in actually one of the opening scenes in that entire opening scene got cut for ultimately, you know, when you go into the editing room, a movie has three lives. First, it appears in the vision of the screenwriter and it exists in that world. Then its second life is when you are shooting it and it exists in the world that is created through the director and the actors and the shots that you make, and then all that footage. And then its final life starts to come together in the editing room. When you get into the editing room, you start to see where the rhythm and pace of the film is working and not working. One of the most challenging things in directing anything, but especially a feature film, is having an understanding and always keeping it in your head when you're shooting, what's the rhythm and pace of this movie and where am I at with this shot, and how this shot, whatever it is, you know, when you look at how is that going to fit in to the movie, and how is it going to affect the pace and the rhythm. So when you get into the editing room, that's when you start to get the whole picture, and that's when you start snipping things and you start moving some things around, compressing some scenes, taking some stuff out, because you see, as you put it all together, the rhythm that's really emerging. Sometimes it throws you some surprises, um, different than what you expected. And it's one of the things you have to deal with when you're on set. This is why I love the cast that I had. One of the things that you realize when you are have more production experience is, in real life, we tend at times to speak slower, but it seems like it's coming across fast. Well, on film, a lot of actors will want to just naturally kind of milk certain moments, and the dialogue starts slowing that down a bit. And you want to make sure that people are staying in character with the right motivation for their characters, but that they're speaking maybe a little faster than they might normally do in most instances in real life. This was something that Frank Capra used greatly in films like It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, State of the Union, all, you know, a lot of those. Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. He really wanted the actors to speak faster because he knew that when it got up on the screen, it would look slower. It's a weird phenomenon, but it does happen a lot. And this is something that contributes to the nature of the pacing and the rhythm in movie making. And so there were some things that caught me a little by surprise, and I realized, oh, you know, that some stuff's going to have to be cut here if we don't want to put the brake on the flow of the rhythm of the film. And sometimes those decisions are very difficult because you really love the scene you're cutting, or cutting in half, or whatever. But those are decisions you make, you know, along the way.
Absolutely. And of course, the other person I got to ask about is Darcy DeMoss, because she just did Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives the year before. So,
Yeah. Well,
or, yep.
have you had an opportunity to chat with Darcy? I think that, you know, certainly Tommy has. I think Tommy Colbert.
I've reached out to Darcy 2 or 3 times and never heard back, and I just kind of gave up on it.
Well, I hope you do have a chance to connect. She's a delight. She's a fascinating person, and she's had quite an interesting career, and certainly a lot in the horror genre, and done really well in that. Um, she was rather young when Return to Horror High, and for her, I needed someone who could really embody um, the fun of this character who's there, but who also was completely uninhibited by the brief element of nudity. There's a, you know, scene where her top gets pulled off and she's grabbed, and all this, and have the right kind of attitude, a little bit of snarky sense, and Darcy's a real hoot. She uh, she was a lot of fun to work with, very professional. One of my favorite memories of the show. Here I am. I'm a young guy making my directorial debut. I'm taking it the job very seriously, although I wanted to have a lot of fun with it. I wanted to do a really good job and be professional and everything else. And Darcy, very professional actress, wants to know exactly what I'm looking for so she can be fully prepared. So she knows what the scene calls for, where she's kind of approached from behind by Philip McKeon's character. And he grabs her and kind of pulls her cheerleading sweater up, and we get some of that gratuitous nudity that the studios want, that are prevalent in every horror film. And she wanted to have the right attitude about all, but she came to me and she said, "Oh, I want to come to your office and I want to discuss something with you." I said, "Okay." So I'm prepping the film and working on that, and she comes into the office and my assistant's out in the outer office. She comes in and I'm saying, hi, what do you want to talk about? And I've got production boards and shooting schedules all lined up all around the office, and I'm continuing to do my prep work. And her role at the time was not large, but I felt, hey, this is pretty cool. She wants to come and talk about her character. I was fine with that. She wasn't the star of the movie, but I was very pleased that she was taking this seriously. That's a good sign from an actor. Um, and so she came in, she said, "I know what you're looking for and all this." She said, "But here's before you get your shots too," said, "here's what I just wanted to show you." And she lifts her shirt up in my office and says, "This breast looks a little better than this breast. So if you shoot me from this side, I think you're going to have a better shot than if you shoot me from this other side." And I'm like, okay. um, okay, yeah, I can see that. Thank you, Darcy. Said, "Yeah, I just wanted to share that. Look forward to doing this, and didn't want to take up too much of your time. And see ya." And she walked out of the office, and I'm like, "Wow." It's kind of like you go home at night and say, "How was your day?" "Well, pretty cool." So it was just a very funny moment that that I've always remembered, and I always remembered it because she had a great sense of humor, but she was coming in making a very professional decision and statement, saying, "Hey, this angle is going to look better for you if you shoot this side than if you shoot this side." Well, she was actually lovely from either side. And she was a lot of fun to work with. And she's gone on to have quite an interesting career in television and film. And she is still, happily, she is still working as an actress and doing some very interesting things. So
I wouldn't mind having her on here. There comes a point where you can only approach so long, and it's like nothing's happening here. So I don't
well,
know.
I don't
Yeah,
know why you two haven't been able to connect. Maybe Tommy could help a little with that. I know that she's a delight. She's got a great sense of humor. I think she would be a great interview. So
yeah.
maybe don't completely give up on that.
Okay.
You never know what
Do
might
you
happen.
do you think Maureen would be interested to come on here?
She might.
Okay.
That's possible. I in that regard, I don't really know how Maureen feels about doing various interviews of this. One of the things uh, uh, for actors, well, actually for almost everybody, but just thinking of actors in particular, there are some times that they want to move, and I'm not saying this is the case now. They want to move beyond always talking about some things they did in their past, but clearly they understand that things they did in their past are what fans you know respond to. I know that Maureen, she has made peace with the fact of the character of Marcia Brady, and that will always be with her, but I know that she enjoys not only doing other roles but talking about some of those other things and talking about other aspects. So I know she
Oh,
had a
I'd
great
be open to doing all of that,
well, I
you
know
know.
she had a fun time
Hmm.
doing Return to Horror High. She and my sister became good friends for a while. My sister, Marcy, was the costume designer on this film. I
Marcy and
asked,
Marcia.
Yeah, I asked my sister if she would do it. My sister had done Broadway and off Broadway, and she had done opera, and she had done film and television, and it was just fun, being able to work with a family member. But she and Maureen became very friendly, and one of the fun things we did with George. I mean, George doesn't know this, but but he would, he, along with other actors, would call Marcy to find out about certain, costume things, call and give her certain, my shoe size is, or my, all this stuff, so that the costume designer can go uh, start to pull wardrobe and find wardrobe and create it for them. And George was very professional about that, always very on time, very attentive to the information he needed to impart and to show up at fittings and things. So at the time when we made this, you had answer phones. Cell phones didn't really, exist the way they do today. So people would call and leave a message on your answer phone. So we had all these messages of, "Hi, Marcy, this is George Clooney. I want." So I took those, and a friend of mine took those, and we put them together in a CD. So it sounded like George Clooney was constantly harassing. I said, "Hi, Marcy, it's George Clooney. Can you, let me give you this?" And on it we added a voice going, "Is this guy ever going to stop calling her?" And all it was George being properly professional in calling to give the information to the costume designer that she needed, right? Um, so that's one of the fun things we've kept in the pile of memorabilia from Return to Horror High.
You should put that in an extras on the Blu-ray.
Yeah. Well, there is something we were able to do for the company that took over some of the distribution of Return to Horror High and DVD.
Hmm.
And we did it for what initially occurred for the European version. It's supposed to come out in a version for the US, but they asked me to do a director's commentary and to chat about the film. And I invited Greg Sims, our executive producer, and as I
Hmm.
said, the man, because of being a talent agent, who was very responsible for helping to bring in, along with me, obviously, the cast that we had, and with our casting director, Linda Francis. Um, and I invited Greg Sims and our director of photography, Roy Wagner, who I've remained friends with both Greg and Roy to this very day. They're terrific guys, and invited them to come aboard. And the three of us chatted about the film. Roy was spectacular to work with, and we had a grand time. And Roy is just so talented. Uh, he has won 2 Emmys, and he's done great work on feature films. He won an Emmy for the pilot for Beauty and the Beast, and I think for Quantum Leap. He's done so much gorgeous television work, like for CSI and for a lot of other shows. I mean, really outstanding work. Um, and I just can't say enough good things about Roy Wagner. He's a major talent. And it was fun for all of us to sit and look back through the curtains of time and chat about the crazy time we had making Return to Horror High, which we're all amused that it has continued to be kind of a cult classic. I'm tickled that you were interested in chatting to me about it. So I certainly thank you for that. And uh, it is fun talking about that time. It was a very interesting, good time in my life, and it's fun looking back on it.
You've done quite a bit of television, you know. I was wondering what were uh, two or three television projects, whether it be TV series or whatnot, that stood out to you as your biggest accomplishments there, and why?
Hmm. It's a very interesting question. I've basically really liked everything that I've done for a variety of reasons. Some of them different. A lot of them having to do with the people I worked with. Sometimes the nature of the project itself. There are some very fond memories I had. The very first television movie that I did, I think I mentioned this, but it's called If Things Were Different, that Mark and I co-wrote and we co-produced. And the other producer on the project was our friend Clyde Phillips, who has been the showrunner of Dexter as of late. He's done clearly other work. But this starred Suzanne Plachette, who became a great friend. And we had such fun making that film. And it was something where, because of the nature of the film, we got a lot of letters of people who wrote in to say how much it helped them in dealing with some crises in their life. And that meant a lot to know that you did something that reached out and touched somebody else's experience in a positive way. Um, um, they were all very interesting to do. Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer, Scarecrow and Mrs. King. MacGyver was an enormous challenge to help turn that around. Richard Dean Anderson is one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet and work with. And, you know, the star of the original MacGyver and then the star of Stargate SG-1. And I had a fun time. Stargate SG-1 was done in Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
at the Burnaby Studios up there in Vancouver. And was being done by through MGM, and I went up to Vancouver to be one of the co-showrunners. My friends Grant Rosenberg and Garner Simmons, who were already doing Poltergeist: The Legacy, brought me up to help them out. And it was shot at the same studio, so I got to reconnect with Ricky Dean Anderson again, and with Michael Greenberg, who was his producing partner, and Michael was our line producer on MacGyver during the time that I did that. And then I also did The Outer Limits, which was a lot of fun because anthology. I like science fiction. And once again, it was at the same location in Vancouver. Vancouver's a beautiful city. Sometimes it rains a little too much there, but but it is spectacularly beautiful. Um, so those I felt good about. There were two series that I was involved in that only lasted one season, but they were really well done and really good. One was called Legwork. It's one of the first series to be fully shot in New York. It starred Margaret Colin and Frances Dorman, now
Okay.
multiple Academy Award winning Frances McDormand, who was the co-star of this series, along with Margaret. Margaret Colin was the star. But it only lasted a year because the network put it on at the wrong time, the wrong demographic time. They shifted their idea of that, and we got killed in the ratings because the people who would watch that show were not home on Saturday night. We were supposed to be on Tuesday night. But anyway, that's the nature of the political battles inside networks. But that show was that was a really good show. It was created by our friend Frank Abatamarco, who it was really well done, and it should have lasted a long time. There was another short-lived series that I did, was the first ever international co-production of a television series, and that was called A Fine Romance, and it starred Margaret Whitten and Christopher Kazanoff. Christopher Kazanoff had been in Dynasty. Christopher Kazanoff, trying to think of some things that people might have seen. If you ever saw, and if you haven't seen it, you should look it up. It's a great thriller based on Ken Follett's best-selling novel, Eye of the Needle, a World War II thriller, spy thriller. Stars Donald Sutherland, Kate Nelligan, and Christopher Kazanoff plays Kate Nelligan's husband, who's in a wheelchair in this. Donald Sutherland is the German spy masquerading as British.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific film. Margaret Whitten was one of the stars of the film called The Secrets of My Success, that also starred Michael J. Fox, who came working up through the mailroom at a company, and she's hysterical in that. She also plays the team owner of the Cleveland Indians in the baseball comedy starring Charlie Sheen and Dennis Haysbert and a lot of great cast. And it's
Major League.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Captured my memory. Yeah, Major League, very funny film. And Margaret was a delight in this. And that was a story about two people who were married, now divorced, but they get hired to be the co-host of a traveling entertainment show talking about travelogue stuff and whatever. And we shot it all over Europe. and then back in California, but mostly in Europe. And it was a major co-production of ABC, New World Television, Indie Prod, a number of other production companies of other producers, and TF1 out of France, and uh, London Weekend Television, and a German company whose name I still can't pronounce. And they were all involved in this production, and we had to kind of sort all that out. Um, and that was a really well done show. It was a screwball romantic comedy that had been designed with a pilot by a woman named terrific talent named Sally Robinson, and it was designed to replace Moonlighting, the Moonlighting with Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis's initial major role that brought him to fame. And unfortunately, the network loved it, the critics loved it, but then for reasons of political intrigue inside the network, instead of scheduling it at Wednesday, 10 o'clock, when Moonlighting went off, it was supposed to go in its place. They put it on, here's this sophisticated adult screwball romantic comedy like Moonlighting. They ended up putting it on Thursday night at 8 o'clock opposite Bill Cosby, when Bill Cosby was the #1 show in all of television, and we got slaughtered in the ratings. And so it only lasted one season, which was a shame because it was a lot of fun. And one series I did that ended up being a strange kind of pet favorite because it was so unusual was Freddy's Nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
I was given complete creative control of the second and final season of that show, and it was based on the Freddy Krueger character from Nightmare on Elm Street.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was asked to take it over, I said, the only way that I will do this, and I kept turning him down many times. Les Moonves, who at the time, who went on to run CBS, was running big Lorimar Productions at the time, who was doing Freddy's Nightmares. And I kept turning them down because I didn't really want to do it. But finally, they were offering me so many perks. I kind of had, and Les said, look, you got to do this for us. We're in trouble with the show at the moment. We know you can bail us out. Can you take it over? So I said, I'll take it over if I don't want to do just straight Freddy's Nightmares horror, because we can't do the same thing on television that you would do in a feature film. I said, so let me add some black comedy, a la like a Alfred Hitchcock Presents style, little touch of Twilight Zone and my nod to my mentor, Rod Serling. And we ended up having a lot of fun because I was able to make decisions very quickly. Les gave me his word that they would back off so I could move as fast as possible because they were way behind in getting things ready for the launch of this new season. And they were doing it in a very unusual way. They wanted 22 one-hour shows, but each hour had to be comprised of 2 half-hour shows that would stand on their own. So the first half hour had to be a show that could be aired separately as a half hour and stand on its own. The second half hour had to air separate. It could be able to air separately and stand on its own. And those 2 half hours had to join together to form an hour that would stand on its own. Then, in addition to that, those 22-hour shows comprised of the 2 half hours had to be able to hook up with one of the hour shows from the first season to make a 2-hour movie that they could sell foreign. It was an ingenious business idea where they could make a lot of money that way, but it was a nightmare of logistics for us, production-wise and storytelling-wise. So it was an enormous challenge. But taking that challenge on and then having the fun of being able to hire whoever I wanted to for cast and whatever, and I called up a lot of friends, stars, and whatever. Tony Dow was one. It was great to have on there. The star of Leave It to Beaver and other things. Tony just passed this year, sadly. Who was a terrific guy. Sandal Bergman, who was in All That Jazz, and
Conan the Barbarian.
Conan the Barbarian. Boy, you know your actors.
Yeah.
And so many stars that we were able to bring in, because I would say to them, you'll be able to do a role you'll probably never get to do in other films and whatever. Come have fun with us. We were very low budget, but it was a good time. So in some ways, I've enjoyed all those that I've done. Eventually, doing 10 television series back to back to back to back, I got to a point where it does kind of suck the oxygen out of the rest of your life. It's very involving. And so I stepped away to do some pilots for new series. I did a special um, uh, a special documentary feature for the History Channel called Rogue Waves that was on the phenomenon of rogue waves in the ocean that have sunk a lot of ships uh, and uh, and started to, and relatively recently I was putting together an independent feature film that went all the way into casting, was dealing with trying to pull some major stars into that, and eventually the financier didn't have enough money to finish the process, so we're still trying to see what can happen with that. And now I have finally something I wanted to do since I was a kid. I'm now writing novels, and I'm about ready to publish my first novel. I had written a book 12 years ago that's kind of nonfiction and fiction, and I co-wrote it with a man named Mark Victor Hansen. Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen did all the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. So this was a book that was set in the kind of inspirational, self-help, motivational world of stories and and nonfiction. But now I'm still working on some screenplays. I'd like to see about getting set up, but I'm also having a great time writing novels. Completely different creative experience, but one that I'm really enjoying. And it gives me the opportunity to have a little more peaceful lifestyle from time to time. I'm
There you go.
not up to my ears in production. I think that's where some of my hair went to all the production.
Do you ever get to do the convention scene?
Um, I I have not. The only time that I participated in, well, in something like that, um, Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo created a series that they brought me aboard to help them run the last season of it. Um, and um, they had a convention. There was a convention at the end of it that was run in Vancouver, and
Mm-hmm.
fans came from all over the place. And and that was the only time and we all sat on a panel and that was a lot of fun because the fans were just they adored this. And we sat around and chatted about what it was like to to work on the show and do that. But other than that, I've not had the opportunity to go to a convention, especially, I haven't known about Return to Horror High being part of any, for instance, being part of any horror conventions or whatever. That just hasn't crossed my path yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably be open to something like that, but that just hasn't come my way yet.
Oh, they're a lot of fun. I just started doing them in 2017, when Lisa
Yeah.
invited me, and yeah, they're addictive.
Well, we had fun. The series that I was talking about was called The Sentinel.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a cop who had Danny and Paul created this character who had kind of heightened senses that came about from, I guess, an accident or something he'd had. It was a very interesting series, and the fans were um, quite rabid about it for a while. It ran for 4 seasons, and it was shot in Vancouver, and so we had this convention in Vancouver, and it was a lot of fun to see how much the fans enjoyed the show. And they, in some regards, they knew more about some aspects of the show almost than we did. There were some things they were reminding me of some stuff in scripts that I wrote that they that they remembered more than I did, which was kind of fun to see people be able to enjoy something you've done that much. Um, so that was cool.
Do you have any charities that you're involved with besides the Maureen McCormick Food Fund? I had to throw that in there.
Um, from time to time, I've dealt with some charities. I try to keep some of that work local to find ways that I can
Mm-hmm.
help certain, local areas. Over the years, I've been a little reluctant with some larger organizations only until I'm sure that if I'm giving money, I want to make sure that the money is actually going to
Yeah.
what they say they are supporting.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I have found, unfortunately, that the money ends up going to pay the salaries of the people, the somewhat exorbitant salaries, I'll say, of the people who are running the organization, and far less of the money you're giving actually goes to what it is you're trying to support.
Mm-hmm.
So I've tried to be careful about that through the years, and I'm certainly not the richest person, so I've had to be careful with my money. I live rather modestly, um, but I try to see what I can do to help local organizations and people and be involved in my community. So I do that. I certainly have been involved uh, in helping to do a number of things in supporting the Writers Guild, of which I am a member. I'm a member of the Directors Guild of America, the Writers Guild of America, the Screen Actors Guild, and the Television Academy Arts and Science. I'm not a member of even though I've done feature films as a screenwriter and obviously Return to Horror High was, I'm not a member of the Motion Picture Academy. You have to do a certain amount of films that are at a certain level before you are invited to join the Motion Picture Academy. But I'm a very happy and proud member of the Television Academy of Arts and Sciences. I've done a lot of television.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've been very supportive of helping the Writers Guild out when and where I can, both with my time and efforts and input, and because it's a great organization. It keeps if the Writers Guild and Directors Guild and Screen Actors Guild and IATSE and things like if they didn't exist, the studios and the networks we'd all be working for poverty wages and probably could not sustain careers.
Mm.
Because they really don't want to, if they had their way, they really don't want to pay you anything. And the hours in the entertainment business, especially when you're in production or you're in pre-production and production, even post, they're brutal. They are, there's been a lot of work that's had to come about, taken a long time through years of trying to force through laws to get production hours to be less because people have been injured from simply sometimes and killed from falling asleep, driving home, injured on sets when they're so tired they're not able to do a risky situation as well as they should. So the guilds and the unions are vital in the entertainment business. The studios and networks are making a gazillion dollars all the time. The business is always in some sort of state of turmoil, and the studios are always complaining, we're paying too much. We got to make more money. Well, studio and network executives make enormous salaries, and without the guilds and unions, the business would be a wreck. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
those of us who are in those guilds and unions are very grateful for the efforts of the people who do that work for us.
Right. Where can people reach you? You got a web page or anything like that that you want to
I
plug on
do.
here?
Can you can you see the spelling of my name on the screen?
I can, yep.
Yeah. Okay. My website is literally my name.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Froehlich, spelled
Mm-hmm.
FROEHLICH.com. That's my website, and I'm able to. There is some contact that like can be reached through that. Um, that's probably the best way. I mean, I will be making announcements on things like Facebook, and I do have a Facebook public page. I have a personal page. You contacted me through my public
Actually, it was
page.
Tommy Kovac that
You
recommended you because
do? Okay.
sometimes between he and Tommy's always curious what I'm doing, and because I've done this longer than him, but I know he's got a lot more interviews in than me, and I don't know whether it's because he's got more time. I don't know. I work at the hospital here, so
That's
I have
that's
to.
that's really important work.
Yeah, but Tommy's always been interested in what I'm doing, and I had him on my show. I've been on his show, and he's throwing ideas out my way that sometimes maybe I never thought of.
Mhm.
Or he would say, if you reach out to this person, I had this experience with this person. Or if he had a bad experience, he'll give me a warning about it. And I'm like, okay, okay. I've never met Tommy personally. I met him on Facebook here, and when you're doing podcasts, there's um, it's a little community. I think one person I might put you in touch with is Scotty McCoy from Slasher Scotty, who's been on my show 6 times, and he's got a good head on his shoulder and a massive sense of humor. And I think he'd be delighted to talk to you. And I'm pretty sure there's others as well, but Tommy kind of keeps me up on that, because with my schedule, I can be hit or miss if I catch something.
Yeah.
So, yep, and he threw lots of names at me, and I'm like, okay, let's go through these, and yours was one of the top on the list, and I was like, oh yes, Return to Horror High. I said, let's highlight that on the show. That's what a great idea. So I said, yeah,
Well,
the anniversary and everything.
one of the interesting things about a film like Return to Horror High, for those out there who are interested in having a career on some level in film and television, that type of film, that genre, and the nature of small independent film is a way to kind of try to find a way to establish a name for yourself, or a way to have an open door, and to take a risk at something like that. Um, it is the type of business where there are no rules as to how you get into it. A lot of it is based on your own passion, your own confidence, and the ability to be persistent and to keep at it. When I came out from college, I really didn't know anybody. There were a couple of people I was given the opportunity to call, and I stayed in touch with them. But I was able to, through the help of a family friend of a college classmate, they helped me get into the mailroom at Universal, which was really hard to get into. There was a year-long waiting list, and I got jumped to the head of that waiting list, which was heaven sent. And I was delivering mail to everybody, major stars. I was delivering mail to Steven Spielberg. I was delivering mail to Rock Hudson, delivering mail to Alfred Hitchcock, delivering mail to, you people who had offices at the
Oh,
on
love
the lot.
Alfred Hitchcock. I
Yeah.
had his
So,
granddaughter on my show.
oh, very cool.
Yeah, yeah.
So this was an opportunity for me to meet, because the way you get into the entertainment business is you try to meet somebody who can help open a door or a window or something for you. And I was trying to meet people and see if I could start as in any way, shape, or form. Um, and I also, you start to learn how the studio functions because you're delivering the mail to everybody, and you're delivering inter-office mail. And we used to open up a lot of inter-office mail. We wouldn't open up US mail, but we'd open up inter-office mail to read things, to learn how the studio functioned, right? And one of the things I did, because I was so anxious and ambitious to get going in the business, I learned where some of the empty offices were in some of the producers' buildings that didn't seem to ever be filled. And so I went to one of the executives in what's known as the Black Tower, where all the executives were. And I went to the man who was in charge of the physical plant of Universal Studios, a man named Dick Neiman, really nice guy. And I said to him, Mr. Neiman, would you mind if I used one of these offices in between my mail runs? I want to be working on screenplay I'm putting together. And he looked at me and said, well, no one's ever asked that before. And I said, well, I read all the inter-office mail. So I know when someone will be moving into that office, because we get the mail notice of that someone's moving in, they're going to need to get their mail there. And he said, well, okay, go ahead. So I did that. And I'd deliver the mail, go back to the mail room, sort the mail into the slots in the mail room. It was literally a mobile home trailer. But then in between the runs, there was nothing to do but sit around and chat and all that. So I would sneak off to this office and start typing, working on this project. And I first put it together as a treatment, this story that I was based on uh, historical incidents. And one of the people I delivered mail to was Burt Lancaster, who I was a huge fan of. So here's this major movie star who had offices there because he also had a production company. Um, and one time I got the opportunity, his assistant wasn't there. He was in his inner office, and I went to put the mail down on the desk out in the secretary's section. He said, "Oh no, bring it in here." I said, "Well, I can just leave it on the desk out here." He said, "No, no, no, bring it in here. I won't hurt you."
Mhm.
And um, and so as I walked towards him, he looked up and he said, "Oh, you are a big lad." And I kind of smiled at him and said, "That's okay. I won't hurt you." And then he broke into that big movie star grin. And he went, "Ha, ha, ha, sit down. Tell me about yourself." That started a friendship with Burt Lancaster.
Oh, nice.
And I told him I had this treatment. A treatment is like a long short story for a movie. Um, and I said, one of the major roles, one of the two major roles is one I've always seen for you. And he said, "Oh, well, let me read it," which shocked me. And so I did. I ran back to my office and got a copy and ran back in between the mailroom and gave it to me. And he actually read it in like 2 days. I got a call from him and he said, "I love this." He said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "stop by, we'll talk about it. I'll give you some advice on how to deal with this business, but you can tell people that I'm attached to this project. That'll help you gain some traction." I was floored. I thought, "Oh my God, I landed a movie star for for this." Now this is the very beginning of the process, right? You can't shoot a short story or whatever. There's also you have to write a screenplay, then you got to get a production deal. So, but this was an exciting thing to experience. The second person that I wanted for the other major role was a an up and coming star who named Anthony Hopkins. Now, he was not at that time the Sir Anthony Hopkins with all the great things that he's done at this time, but he had done some really cool projects. His star was really on the rise. Um, Everybody knew he was terrific, um, and also a delightful person to meet. So I saw on the call sheets at the studio, which is the list of shows and movies and TV shows that are going to be shot on any given day at the studio. And I saw on this call sheet list that Anthony Hopkins happened to be coming to the studio to shoot a television movie co-starring with Elizabeth Montgomery. They were doing a remake of the old Betty Davis classic called Dark Victory.
Okay.
And so I delivered mail on a regular basis to a producer who had a production deal on the lot who was producing this television movie, and his name was Jules Irving. Really nice guy and a very successful producer, very intelligent man, who also was the father of actress Amy Irving, who was Steven Spielberg's first wife. You
Mm-hmm.
see all these connections that are coming together, right? So I went to Jules Irving's office, and Jules Irving was one of the producers on the lot, one of the people on the lot who was kind enough and nice enough to talk to me and answer some questions from time to time. Here I am, I'm a mail messenger, right? Or as they would say, a mail boy in the mailroom. And a lot of people didn't take you seriously. But I mean, everybody in the mailroom, there were attorneys in the mailroom because everybody was trying to meet people to get into the entertainment business. Jules Irving was a really nice man, and he did not belittle you, and he knew that I and others were really wanting to find a professional way into the business. So I went to him and I said, um, "Would you mind introducing me to Anthony Hopkins when he comes on the lot?" And he looked at me and he was a little skeptical, and he said, "Well, I don't really want to bother the actors, while they're working." And I said, "Well, I have this treatment that I've written that I would like to present to him because one of the key two starring roles is written for him. I'd like to see if he's interested." And then I looked at Jules Irving and I said, "And I already have Burt Lancaster committed to the project." And he looked at me and he said, you have Burt Lancaster committed to this? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, okay, uh, next week, Tony's going to be on the set shooting. Come by my office. We'll go down. And he introduced me to Anthony Hopkins, who said, call me Tony. Um, and and that started, Tony read the same treatment that Burt Lancaster did. He knew Burt Lancaster was committed to it. Um, and he went, oh, you've got Burt on this? And he said, no one's ever written something specifically for me. I'd be glad to read it. He read it, loved it, and said, yes, I want to do this. So now I had Burt Lancaster and Anthony Hopkins committed to this project. Um, now I'm at the very beginning of a project that's way over my head, right? But at least I've got something going. And this also started a friendship that lasted for a few years with Anthony Hopkins. At a certain point, when he and his then wife went back to England, I started to lose a little bit of touch with him because his star was really soaring. And I was still working on the early stages of this project. But he's a delightful man and obviously an incredible actor. What a talent. So here I am on the Universal Studios lot. I've got this project, and I would sneak away to my office and now start working on the screenplay. And how I got out of Universal was I'm sitting there writing one day, and I look up because I see this shadow of this person who's in the doorway of my so-called office, right? And I had borrowed the charge number of the president of the studio, Sid Sheinberg, to order a typewriter, to order a name plaque for the door for me. But it very small cost, but I figured no one's going to notice that because he has 10 charge numbers. This isn't even going to be a blip on one of those charge numbers. So I look up to the doorway and it's Sid Sheinberg in the door. Now, this is one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, and also someone who was known as a real tough negotiator, a real tough executive. What I didn't know is he's also an executive that really respected talent. And he's the one who basically launched Steven Spielberg, giving him the deal and whatever. And they were lifelong friends from that point on. But I thought I'm going to jail because he said, Bill, what are you doing there? I was first shocked that he even knew my name. And I said, oh, Mr. Sheinberg, I'm writing a screenplay based on this project that I have, and I'm looking at him like this. I have Burt Lancaster and Anthony Hopkins committed to it. And he goes, And he said, are we going to have a first look at that script? I said, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yep. You're going to, Universal will get a first look. And he looked at me and said, good. I just wanted to make sure my charge number was going to good use. And then he walked away and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to jail. A short time after that, I had been delivering the mail to a director. And he learned that I had this office on the lot. I had Lancaster and Hopkins committed this thing. He thought, oh my goodness, that's interesting. So he showed me a script that he had Katherine Hepburn attached to, but he didn't have all the money to make the film. I had met a group of doctors and dentists who were combining their financial resources looking for tax shelters. At that time, motion pictures were a great way for have a tax shelter for people to get tax relief from investment. So these doctors and dentists were not interested in my project with Burt Lancaster and Anthony Hopkins because they didn't trust a 23, 24-year-old kid with this. But when I told the director, I said, would you mind if I read your script? And I told him about these doctors. And he said, yeah, sure, go ahead. I read the script. I then asked him, can I show it to this group? And he said, sure. And they ended up being able to, they were very interested in the project, and that interest in the money there and all that. When the project went fully forward, this director, Richard Cola, really nice guy, a very artistic director, he said, why don't you come aboard as like co-producer or associate producer for this film? And I left the mailroom one day as a mailboy. I went to do the Katherine Hepburn feature as like associate producer the next day. And that was my baptism with fire in the entertainment business. But it came about by realizing there are no rules. You just keep plugging away, finding whatever open door, open window you can get in. And that's what I would say to people who are interested in this business is don't give up and be open to trying all sorts of things as long as it's not something that's going to hurt somebody. Because you never know, but have faith, have confidence in yourself and passion in what you're doing, and people will respond to that.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, Bill? It was wonderful having you come on here today and reminisce about returning to Horror High. And,
Well, thank
you
you so
know,
much
yeah, this has been
for
a lot of
asking.
fun. Yeah. And, I'm going to wrap up here because I know that you're going to bring sloppy joes over to Maureen and watch her eat them. And
But for the
that's the running joke here. Maureen
I think
McCormick eating.
that was a great funny image. I'm glad you picked up on that, and I really appreciate and I'm grateful for you asking me to come join you on this. You do a really nice job with this, and from one human being to another, thank you so much for the work you do at the hospital. That's vital, helpful work that changes people's lives. So thank you, and thank
Yeah,
you
I
for
work in housekeeping and cleaning, and I'm doing a run tonight that I haven't done before, but that's okay because the person that normally does it is visiting her family in Alberta, and I'm happy to fill in because she had a lot of faith in me because I like doing the overnight work because
ah,
I can schedule these during the day.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
No. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been really nice. It's really good.
absolutely. Before I let you go, would you mind doing a plug for my show?
Sure.
Just state your name and that we're celebrating the anniversary of Return to Horror High, the 35th anniversary, and say you're listening to Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise.
Paradise. Okay. Hi, this is Bill Froehlich, writer, producer, and director of Return to Horror High, celebrating the 35th anniversary of the release of this film. And please check out and watch Greg Gilbert's Python's Paradise as he presents this interesting look at Return to Horror High. Have fun with Greg.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Bill, for coming on here. This has been a lot of fun, and I could tell you're very passionate about the business. You're very well spoken. This was so much better than I could have ever imagined. So I loved having you on here today, and a special acknowledgement to Tommy Kovac for suggesting
Well,
because
I'm glad he did. I had a very good time with Tommy. I've had a very good time with you. I thank you very much, and I wish you the best with your podcast. I think it's a very cool thing you're doing.
absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. God bless you, and you have yourself a very wonderful day.
Thank you.
You take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.